Yeah, I think what the last texter, said about money and religion, there's no doubt about it. Where there's religion, there's money. You look at the Vatican, they've got more wealth than some countries. And I do think sometimes religion can be a bad influence on politics. Sometimes some religions have very small leaders, very tight-knit group of leaders at top, which are really hard to get into. And so it kind of becomes an oligarchy in its own sense. Very few select individuals, an elite, a religious elite, control everything. And so I can understand in that sense, yeah, sure, religion can be bad. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean...
I think it depends on the religion itself and how it's portrayed. If you're, for example, Saudi Arabia, it's a religious state. And those views are imposed on everybody. Women can't drive. I mean, going to one extreme. So if a religion says a woman can't drive and it's undermining equality, then it can be bad having a religious state.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting point. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The thing is, I'm pretty sure in the Quran it doesn't say women can't drive.
It doesn't
either.
say that.
So yeah, so that points out to the thing that the leaders in charge can interpret their religion and give an interpretation and enforce that on people. And I think that's where problems can arise.
And the conversation is about the notion of a secular society, and is Britain a secular society? I think it's worth also considering that you just mentioned Saudi Arabia. That's one extreme, and we have India, which seems to be the other extreme, which is falling over itself backwards to be recognised as secular, whereas other nations are saying, well, we're not even interested in being secular. In fact, they are taking it to the other extreme, saying this is what we are going to be doing, and this is to be imposed on our own people, but also onto other people. You can't, for example, you can't travel through Saudi with religious material of any other religion.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've got a very strong idea of how theocratic they want to run their particular country, and they've been doing it for a long period of time.
Definitely, and I think even states like Dubai, whereas it doesn't come across overly religious, but even during Ramadan, you can't be seen eating in public, even if you're not Muslim and you're not fasting, you're still not allowed to do that. So religion does play a very big role in the Middle East. Even if you don't believe in that religion, it's still imposed on you.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens. I mean, with the world getting smaller and smaller, and national boundaries meaning less and less, it'd be interesting to see how these countries can interact and how these religious values can be imposed when people are moving around so freely.
We've had another text in from Ashwin. He said, so India can be secular like the USA, but still be influenced by Hinduism. I think that's what you were saying earlier, Vivek, with the USA, how it's secular, but there's a very strong Christian group.
Yeah, sure. I think that's fair. It could be like that. But I think what happens then, one concern with that is as soon as you don't have something enshrined, you don't know who's pulling the strings. Is it the Hindus doing this? Who do you hold accountable? Who's influencing what policy? Because they're not part of the structure officially.
Yeah, and the Indian Parliament doesn't have anybody of the equivalent of bishops in any of the chambers. So there is no access to a religious group into the legislative bodies at all. And that was one control that was put into the constitution to try and maintain its secularity. And in the same way that Hindus, there is no religious leader who can go in. There are no religious leaders from any other denomination who can go in on a religious ticket either. So it is an attempt to try and keep equality there. But I think what you said earlier on about the appearance of secularity and the reality of non-secularity being acted out hand in hand, that applies to the Indian scene very, very clearly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think the underlying issue, again, is about rights. Yeah. You've got to be free to make your own choice or to have a political voice, express your opinion. And I think as long as those values are respected, I don't think religion seems to have a problem. That seems reasonable to me.
We've had a text in from Kapil. He said, not secularism or democracy can help some countries, i.e. African countries. I'm not too sure who means by that.
So that was Kapil who texted in. Could you just reread that again for our listeners?
Not secularism nor democracy can help some countries, i.e. African countries.
Well, it's an interesting perspective, especially in the time when Nelson Mandela has just left us. There are a great number of African scholars and academics who are quite happy to say, please leave us to help ourselves. We do not need help from historically groups and nations who have perhaps not really been as helpful as they pretended to. I came across a map which somebody had redrawn about the globe, and they compared the real map to the maps that had been used all over the world for many, many years. And in it, the American nation and England, the land masses were shown disproportionately large, and Africa was shown to be a tiny continent in proportion, whereas the reality is that Africa is a huge continent. And now they're beginning to recognise that they do have a place and they do have a voice. And that voice, I think, is probably going to be a secular voice. There will be an increasing, as far as I can see what's happening, a possibility of an increasing move away from their traditional Christian faith and Islamic faith into more secular developments.
I hope so, but then you see all the problems that happened in Kenya recently with the massacre, and in Nigeria there's always trouble. How far can they be secular with all these groups trying to exert their religious control?
I think there's another point as well that the text mentioned about democracy. In developing nations, I know South Korea is a really good example actually. In South Korea, it wasn't a democratic country, and when it developed, it wasn't democratic. But because it wasn't democratic, it developed so much faster than any other country, and it democratized after it developed. So I think there is an argument that says that, for non-democratic countries, they can develop really fast. You can get all the infrastructure, all the developments in place, and sure, you could perhaps democratize afterwards, right?
That's what happened in Russia with the build-up to the war under the Soviet Union. They rapidly industrialized and then helped win the war.
So are we actually here on a reasonable conversation? Are we actually advocating that a benign dictatorship is a reasonable solution to the ills of developing countries? And it's a serious question, because I think there is probably as much to be said for it as making a completely free-for-all, so that any corporations can come in and develop their own infrastructure and take their own resources in the name of development, which seems to be more fitting with the profile of what's happened in Africa. Oh, well, welcome to A Reasonable Conversation. We're having a conversation on secularity, and is Britain a secular country? We've got a few more texts coming in, but we're going to take a break, and here are a few more words from some of our advertisers.
You're tuned into A Reasonable Conversation on Nusound Radio 92 FM, and we've been talking about, is Britain a secular state? Do keep your texts coming in on 07961 387 787, and you can also talk to us on the studio at 0208 472 9292.
Thank you very much for that, Prerna. I think we've had a few texts in as well, and the texts that we've been talking about, I think, are pointing towards one little understanding. Maybe a secular society is a good thing, and it can be a bad thing. And in the same way, a theocracy could also be a very good thing, and it could be a bad thing, depending upon its implementation. So is it that old adage of good people always follow laws, and so they don't need laws, whereas bad people will always break laws, so they don't need laws either?
No comment, I'm not saying that.
Possibly. I think the general gist of it is that if there are morals in society and people abide by those morals, it doesn't matter if a country is religious or secular, as long as it works. And people enable it to work. Yeah,
and it's the same thing with a theocracy, or even democracy. If the person in charge has great moral values and knows exactly what he's doing, then what's the problem?
So the similarity, it seems to me, between the British model and the Indian model is very, very stark. Here in the British model, we have a theocracy. We have a legacy system which was a nation run by the Christian Church, and still we have a defender of faiths. In the monarchy there is a title, so yes, there is a state religion, as it were, but the practice on the ground amongst people at grassroots level is that there is a much more free and flowing life possible without the dictates of theocracy. Now that's very similar to the old Indian model, because remember, as I mentioned, that the Hindu model used to openly accept full engagement, full interaction and full equal rights with people of all different religions as well.
Definitely. Amr's just texted it, and he said one good leader is better than a democratic group who are corrupt. I think that was touching upon what we said before.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. And I know not a lot of people would, but yeah.
I think so. I think we're all agreed on that if you have a genuine leader, then a leader can take the responsibility for also shouldering the responsibility for everybody else's well-being, and that's really what being a leader is about, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the biggest difficulties with committees is that you get the lowest common denominator. You get the one thing that everybody agrees on, and the possibility of no major progress at all.
Yeah, definitely, because I think sometimes with a democratic leader, there'd always be pandering to the public and pandering to what people want, and you wouldn't really give a clear motive or clear goal, because
it becomes like a popularity contest.
Yeah,
almost like the X Factor in politics, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so what we're hoping to move towards is that the people who are guiding our country, Britain here in the 21st century, that they too gravitate towards having reasonable conversations.
Definitely. And what's your opinion? Do we think a secular state is bad? Should Britain be secular? Are we quite happy having unelected bishops in the House of Lords and having the Christian theme running throughout the country? What do we think?
I think it's a situation that we're faced with, isn't it? We have to work with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's probably true to say that everybody is trying to move towards, all of the institutions are trying to move towards the nation as it is today. And the churches have been around for a long, long time. They are steeped in tradition and ritual, and it's the hardest thing to change. An institution is the hardest thing to change. And I'm sure there are people working within all of the institutions to try and bring them up to speed, up to date, without actually losing the essence and the very core of their being. Recently we've had this development where the Anglican Church is now agreeing to allow ladies to be bishops, women bishops, and that's a big shift from doctrinally. But it is a shift towards secularity, a shift towards equality, and a shift towards a reasonable way of engaging.
Yeah, so I mean, I think equality is the main thing, right? I think it's okay to be religious. I think there's a knee-jerk reaction against theocracies or religion in politics, but I think as long as everyone's equality is respected, there shouldn't really be a problem.
But then are we all equal in Britain? Because there are religious courts, such as Sharia courts, which differentiate between those who choose to abide by them.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, that then leads to the question that there is not a secular notion. The principle of secularity is that religious beliefs, ideas and organisations must not enjoy privileged protection.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is any aspect which says we're different to everybody else, and therefore we deserve to be treated differently, then that goes against the secular model. That is one of the fundamental tenets of the model of secularity.
So that's quite ironic then. So we're saying that Britain isn't secular, but not because of Christianity, one of the more minority religions.
Because we're not equal before the
we're
law.
not equal, right? Yeah.
And even within Sharia law, there are differentiations between a male and female. There's different laws that apply to women and men as well. So even further, we're not equal.
So it's the free market which is beginning to, the religious free market which is beginning to exert its muscles and muscular strength.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've been talking about secularity. Is British life genuinely secular? Is the nature of the institutions that we that guide our lives here in Britain, are they secular? Are they moving towards it? And indeed, is secular the model of a secularity a good model in the 21st century?
So, I think what we've realised is there seems to be some historical remnants which have stayed in the system since, before Britain was secular. And they don't exert that much influence, but they're still there. And, but I think on the whole, Britain is mainly secular, apart from a few small elements which seem to...
here and there.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have a new archbishop, and he has his work cut out. I heard some commentary the other day where he was referred to as the spawn of Satan, right? And
wow.
and this was from Christian groups. So everybody, I think, is moving towards a better sense of equality. But there is a lot of work to be done.
Definitely. And on that note, thank you all our listeners for tuning in today. Do join us next week where we'll be talking about Christmas. I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the Christmas break. Please do like our new Facebook page. It's www.facebook.com/reasonable conversation. And you can write to us and tell us all your views and opinions in advance. So let us know what you think about Christmas.
Thank you very much, Prerna. And goodbye from Satish.
Yeah, thank you for listening, and see you next week from Vivek.